I went to the hospital to take care of my son who had a broken bone. While he was sleeping, the head nurse quietly slipped a piece of paper into my hand. It read, "Don't come again. He is lying. Check the camera at 4 a.m." What I saw in the footage left me in shock. I am Vernon Hayes, 68 years old, and for the last 3 decades I have been a father first and a man second. People look at me and see an old black man in a flannel shirt driving a rusted pickup truck. They see a retiree who probably pinches pennies to buy a coffee. They have no idea that I hold 7 patents in industrial engineering, or that the very ground their fancy suburban homes are built on was surveyed by my firm. I learned a long time ago that silence is power, and moving in the shadows gives you a vantage point that loud people never get. But today my silence was not a strategy. It was a necessity to survive the heartbreak of seeing my only son broken. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight a war to save a family member who didn't even know they were a hostage. The smell of the hospital hit me the moment the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor. It was that distinct mix of antiseptic floor wax and human misery. My chest was tight. My son Trey is 32 years old. He is a grown man, an architect, a father himself. He is 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, the kind of man who shouldn't be fragile. Yet when I got the call from his wife Skylar saying he had fallen down the stairs, my stomach turned over. Trey has the balance of a cat. He played varsity basketball. He doesn't just fall. I walked down the corridor counting the room numbers. 302, 303, 304. I reached for the handle, but before I could even touch the metal, the door swung open. Skylar was standing there. She is 28 with blonde hair that always looks perfect and blue eyes that can switch from innocent to icy in a blink. To the outside world, she looks like a porcelain doll. To me, she has always looked like a shark in a sundress. "Vernon," she whispered, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You really didn't have to come. I told you on the phone he is resting. The doctor said he needs absolute quiet." I looked past her shoulder. The room was dim, but I could see the outline of my son on the bed. His leg was suspended in a traction sling. His face was a map of purple and yellow bruises. "Get out of my way, Skylar," I said, keeping my voice low. "I am seeing my son." She hesitated for a second, her smile faltering just enough to show the annoyance underneath, but she stepped aside. I walked in. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. I pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed. The screech of the chair legs against the linoleum floor made Trey jump. He flinched. Actually flinched. "Hey, son," I said softly. Trey opened his eyes. They were red-rimmed and glassy. When he saw me, there wasn't relief. There was fear. He didn't look at me. His eyes darted immediately to Skylar, who had positioned herself right at the foot of the bed, her hands clasped together like a grieving saint. "Hey, Dad," Trey croaked. His voice was dry, cracked. "What happened, Trey?" I asked. I leaned in close. I needed him to look at me. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Skylar said you fell down the stairs." Trey swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob. He looked at the ceiling. Yeah, I was carrying the laundry basket down. I missed a step. It was stupid. I tumbled." I looked at his injuries. I am an engineer, retired or not. I know physics. I know how force is applied to mass. I looked at the cast on his leg. Femur fracture. That takes a tremendous amount of force. I looked at the bruising on his face. It was concentrated on the left side, consistent with a strike, not a tumble. And the stairs in their house, I built those stairs. I installed the plush carpeting myself last year for my grandson Leo to play on. You don't shatter a femur falling on high-pile carpet unless you are thrown with the force of a battering ram. You fell on the carpeted stairs. I repeated, my tone hardening. "And you broke your femur and your eye socket. Trey, that doesn't make sense physically." Skylar stepped forward instantly. Her hand landed on Trey's shoulder. It looked like a comforting gesture, but I saw her thumb dig into his collarbone. I saw the pressure. "Oh, Vernon, please," she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Don't make him relive it. He is traumatized enough. It was a freak accident. He was wearing socks. It was slippery. Why are you interrogating him? You should be supporting him." I ignored her. I kept my eyes on my son. "Trey, look at me. Did you fall? Or were you pushed? The machine monitoring his heart rate began to beep faster. Beep, beep, beep. Trey's breath hitched. He looked at Skylar again. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but her jaw was set tight. It was a silent command. "Stop it, Dad!" Trey shouted, his voice cracking. "Why do you always do this? Why do you always try to make Skylar the bad guy?" "I fell. Okay, I am clumsy. I fell. Just leave us alone." The outburst exhausted him. He slumped back against the pillows, gasping for air. Skylar immediately turned to the door and yelled, "Doctor, nurse, please help. He is upsetting him." A moment later, a young doctor rushed in, followed by 2 nurses. He saw Trey hyperventilating and saw me standing over the bed. He made a snap judgment. "Sir, you need to step back," the doctor said sternly. "I didn't touch him," I said, raising my hands. "I am just trying to get the truth. He is harassing my husband." Skylar sobbed, burying her face in her hands. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He has always hated me. He came here just to yell at Trey for being careless. "Please, doctor, his blood pressure is spiking." The doctor turned to me, his face cold. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave. The patient's vitals are unstable. We cannot have this kind of stress in the ICU." "But he is lying," I said, looking at the doctor. "Look at the injuries. That is not a fall." "Sir, leave now or I will call security," the doctor warned. He didn't care about my logic. He cared about the weeping young wife and the distressed patient. To him, I was just an angry, confused old man causing a scene. I looked at Trey one last time. He had turned his face into the pillow. He wouldn't even look at me. I felt a stinging sensation in my eyes, but I refused to let it show. I nodded slowly. "Fine. I'm leaving." I walked out of the room. Skylar followed me to the door. Before she closed it, she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper so the doctor couldn't hear. "Don't come back, Vernon. You are toxic. We don't want you here. And neither does Leo." The mention of my grandson hit me like a physical blow. She slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wood grain, feeling a rage so hot it almost blinded me. I wanted to kick the door down. I wanted to drag her out by that perfect blonde hair, but I knew that would only put me in handcuffs and leave Trey alone with her forever. I turned around and started walking toward the elevators. My legs felt heavy. I felt old. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was just a bitter old man who couldn't accept that his son was clumsy. Maybe I was wrong. "Excuse me, sir." I felt a sudden sharp bump against my shoulder. A large woman in scrubs had walked right into me. It was the head nurse. I had seen her name tag earlier. Betty. She was a woman in her 60s with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that had seen everything life and death had to offer. "Watch where you are going," I muttered, still dazed. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look at my face. She kept walking past me, her pace brisk. But as she bumped me, I felt her hand press something into the pocket of my flannel jacket. It was quick practice, like a magician's trick. I stopped and turned to look at her, but she was already rounding the corner, barking orders at a junior nurse. I stepped into the empty elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I reached into my pocket. My fingers curled around a small folded piece of paper and something hard and metallic. I pulled them out. It was a generic hospital sticky note and a small silver USB drive. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was rushed, jagged. "Don't come again. He is lying. Check the camera at 4 a.m. I stared at the words until they blurred. Check the camera. 4 a.m. The elevator dinged, opening into the damp concrete parking garage. I didn't go home. I couldn't go home. I climbed into the cab of my truck, the only place in the world that felt safe right now. Rain was starting to drum against the roof. I pulled my laptop out from under the passenger seat. I carried it everywhere. Old habits from my engineering days die hard. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 2 tries to plug the USB drive into the port. A folder popped up on the screen. Inside was a single video file. ICU_room_304_0400am.mp4. I clicked play. The video was in black and white night vision, but the resolution was sharp. The timestamp in the corner read 03:59:50. The room was quiet. Trey was asleep, heavily sedated. Skylar was in the recliner next to the bed. At 4:10, Skylar sat up. She didn't stretch. She didn't rub her eyes. She sat up with purpose. She looked at the door, checking to make sure it was closed. Then she stood over my son. I watched, holding my breath, expecting her to fix his blanket or kiss his forehead. Instead, she leaned down close to his ear. I turned the volume on my laptop all the way up. The microphone on the camera picked up the hum of the machines and her whisper. It was a hiss. "Wake up," she said. Trey stirred. "Huh, Skylar." Then I saw it. I saw the moment my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Skylar reached out with both hands and grabbed Trey's broken leg right over the fracture site, and she squeezed. She didn't just touch it. She dug her fingers in. Trey's body arched off the mattress. His mouth opened in a silent scream of agony, his eyes bulging. Skylar clamped her other hand over his mouth, smothering the sound. She held him there, pinned down, torturing him. "Listen to me, you pathetic coward," she hissed, her face inches from his. "You tell your father you fell. You tell the doctors you are clumsy. If you say one word about me pushing you, if you even hint at it, Leo will have an accident too. Do you hear me? Kids are so clumsy these days. They fall out of windows all the time." Trey was sobbing under her hand, nodding frantically, begging with his eyes for her to stop. She held the pressure for another 5 seconds, an eternity, before letting go. She smoothed his blanket, patted his cheek, and sat back down in her chair as if nothing had happened. "Remember the script, Trey. You fell." I slammed the laptop shut. I couldn't breathe. The air in the truck felt thin. A primal roar built up in my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. I punched the steering wheel. Once, twice. The leather cracked under my fist. My son wasn't just broken. He was a hostage. And that woman, that monster in a sundress, she had threatened my grandson. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. The sadness was gone. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical clarity. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The tired old man was gone. Skylar Vance had made a fatal calculation. She thought she was dealing with a helpless father. She didn't know she had just declared war on a man who builds foundations for a living and knows exactly how to tear them down. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home. I was going back up there. And God help anyone who stood in my way. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof of my 1998 Ford pickup truck. I sat there in the dark parking garage, listening to the water and the hum of the engine cooling down. To anyone walking by, I was just another old man in a beat-up truck, probably waiting for a shift change or saving money on parking fees. That is exactly how I like it. This truck, with its rusted wheel wells and torn upholstery, is my camouflage. It is invisible, just like me. My son Trey used to hate this truck. He would beg me to buy something newer, something that reflected the fact that his father was the lead engineer on the city's largest bridge project. But I told him that wealth shouts, but power whispers. Right now, I didn't feel powerful. I felt paralyzed. The silver USB drive felt heavy in my hand, hotter than it should be. It sat on the passenger seat next to my laptop like a loaded gun. The nurse Betty had risked her job to give this to me. She saw something I was too blind or too scared to see. But still I hesitated. I stared at the blank screen of my laptop. A part of me, the part that was just a father, wanted to throw the drive out the window. I wanted to believe Skylar. I wanted to believe that my daughter-in-law was just a high-strung young woman who loved her husband too much. I wanted to believe that Trey really did just fall down the stairs because the alternative was too dark to contemplate. If I watched this video and saw nothing, I would be the villain. I would be the suspicious, jealous old man trying to ruin his son's marriage. But if I watched it and saw something real, my world would never be the same. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of old leather and stale coffee. I am a man of science. I deal in facts, not feelings. The data was right there. Avoiding it was cowardice. I opened the laptop. The blue light of the screen illuminated the cab, casting long shadows across my face. My fingers trembled slightly as I plugged the drive into the port. The computer chimed. A single file appeared. I moved the cursor and clicked play. The video player opened. It was a black and white feed from inside the ICU room. The resolution was surprisingly clear, sharp enough to see the rise and fall of Trey's chest. The timestamp in the top right corner read 3:59 in the morning. The room was still. The heart monitor pulsed with a steady rhythm. Skylar was sitting in the recliner next to the bed. Her head was bowed, and for a moment I thought she was praying. Then the clock struck 4:00. Skylar lifted her head. She looked directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine. She wasn't looking at the lens, she was checking the door. She stood up. Her movements were fluid and predatory like a cat stalking a bird. She didn't look tired. She didn't look worried. She looked focused. She walked to the side of the bed where Trey's broken leg was elevated in the sling. She stood there for a moment, just watching him sleep. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you doing, Skylar?" She reached out. Her hands were small, manicured, delicate. She placed them gently on the cast right above where the femur had snapped. It looked like a caress. Then her body went rigid. I saw the muscles in her forearms tense. She squeezed. I gasped aloud in the empty truck. On the screen, Trey woke up instantly. His body convulsed. His back arched off the mattress in a spasm of pure agony. His mouth flew open to scream, but Skylar was faster. She clamped her other hand over his mouth, stifling his cry into a muffled whimper. She leaned her weight into his broken leg, grinding the fractured bones together. I could almost feel the pain myself, a sharp, white-hot lance shooting through my own leg. Trey was thrashing now, his eyes wide with terror tears streaming down his face. He grabbed at her wrist, trying to pull her hand away, but he was weak from the medication and the shock. She was relentless. She held him there, pinned like an insect under a microscope. I turned the volume up to the maximum. Through the tinny speakers of my laptop, I heard her voice. It wasn't the sweet voice she used with the doctors. It was a low, venomous hiss. "Stop moving, Trey," she whispered. She leaned down so her lips were brushing his ear. "You think you can tell your daddy stories? You think he can save you? Look at you. You are pathetic." She twisted her hand on his leg again. Trey let out a high-pitched keen behind her hand, a sound of absolute defeat. "Listen to me closely, because I am only going to say this once," she hissed. "If you tell anyone that I pushed you, if you tell the police, if you tell that old fool father of yours, then Leo is next." My blood froze. Leo. My 5-year-old grandson. Kids are so clumsy, Trey. She continued, her voice light and conversational, which made it terrifying. They fall out of windows all the time, or they run into traffic. It would be such a tragedy if Leo had an accident while you were stuck in here unable to protect him, wouldn't it? Trey stopped struggling. The fight went out of him completely. He lay there limp, sobbing quietly, his eyes fixed on her face with a look of total submission. He nodded slowly. "Good boy," Skylar said. She released his leg. She took her hand off his mouth. She smoothed his hair back, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a tender gesture that made me want to vomit. "Now go back to sleep. We have a big day tomorrow. I have to cry for the doctors again." The video ended. The screen went black. For a moment, I just sat there. The silence in the truck was deafening. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My son wasn't clumsy. He was being tortured. He wasn't avoiding my eyes because he was annoyed. He was avoiding my eyes because he was trying to save his son's life. A roar built up in my chest, starting deep in my belly and clawing its way up my throat. It was a sound I hadn't made since my wife passed away, a sound of pure animalistic grief and rage. I screamed. I drew my fist back and smashed it into the steering wheel. Crack! The plastic of the center console splintered under the force of the blow. I didn't feel it. I hit it again and again. I hit it until the leather wrap on the wheel tore. I hit it until my knuckles split open and warm blood began to trickle down my hand. I rested my forehead against the broken steering wheel, breathing heavily. Tears were mixing with the sweat on my face. I closed my eyes and a memory flashed through my mind. I saw Trey at 10 years old. He was standing on the pitcher's mound at his Little League game. A kid twice his size was at bat, staring him down. Trey didn't flinch. He wound up and threw a strike. He was fearless. He was strong. He used to stand between bullies and the smaller kids at school. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, letting a woman break his bones because he loved his son more than his own life. He wasn't weak. He was sacrificing himself. I lifted my head. I looked at my hand. The blood was dark in the shadows. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a greasy shop rag. I wiped the blood away. The pain in my hand was sharp and grounding. It cleared the fog in my head. The sadness evaporated, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. I am not just a father anymore. I am an engineer. And I have identified the structural failure in this family. Skylar Vance is a cancer. And you don't negotiate with cancer, you cut it out. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it under the seat. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My jaw was set. The old man was gone. The predator was here. I reached for the ignition key but stopped. Through the rain-slicked windshield, I saw movement near the hospital entrance. A sleek white BMW pulled out from the valet circle. It was her car. I knew that license plate. Skylar was leaving. She was probably going home to shower, or maybe to spend the money she was stealing from my son. It didn't matter where she was going. What mattered was that she was leaving Trey alone. This was it. This was the window. I watched her taillights fade into the rainy night. She thought she had won. She thought she had scared me off with her restraining order threats and her performance for the doctors. She thought I was driving home to lick my wounds. She was wrong. I turned the key. The engine of the old Ford roared to life, a deep guttural growl that sounded like a war cry. I wasn't going home. I shifted the truck into drive and pulled out of the parking spot. I was going back up to room 304, and this time I wasn't asking for permission to enter. I was going to get the truth from my son, and I was going to burn Skylar's world to the ground. The hospital corridor was a tunnel of silence broken only by the rhythmic chirping of monitors and the squeak of my wet rubber soles on the linoleum. I kept my head down. My baseball cap was pulled low over my eyes. I wasn't Vernon Hayes the engineer or the father anymore. I was an intruder. I was a ghost slipping back into a graveyard. I checked the nurse's station. It was empty. Betty must have cleared the way for me. She was buying me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to save my son's life. 5 minutes to undo 3 years of brainwashing. I reached room 304 and pushed the door open just an inch. The room was dark except for the glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the blinds. Trey was awake. He wasn't moving. He was staring at the ceiling with eyes that looked like empty wells. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner. When the door clicked shut behind me, he flinched so hard the bed rails rattled. He turned his head and saw me. For a split second, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Just a spark. But then the fear rushed back in like a tidal wave, drowning the boy I raised. "You came back," Trey whispered, his voice trembling. "You have to leave Dad. If she comes back and finds you here, she will be so angry. You don't know what she gets like when she is angry." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't take off my wet coat. I walked straight to the side of the bed and pulled out my phone. I had transferred the video file from the laptop in the truck. "I am not leaving until you see this," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. I held the phone screen inches from his face. "Watch it, Trey. Don't look away. Just watch." I pressed play. The black and white footage lit up the space between us. I watched Trey's eyes. I expected him to gasp. I expected him to cry out in shock. I expected him to look at me and say thank you for saving me. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. As the video played and showed Skylar digging her fingers into his broken leg, Trey didn't look horrified at her actions. He looked terrified of the phone itself. He started shaking. His breath came in short, sharp rasps. "Turn it off," he begged. "Dad, stop it. Turn it off right now." I held it firmer. "No. Look at what she is doing to you. Look at her face, Trey. That isn't love. That is torture." Trey squeezed his eyes shut. He started shaking his head back and forth on the pillow violently. "It is not real. It is not real. You made it up. You doctored it." I grabbed his shoulder with my free hand. "It is real, son. I got it from the hospital security feed. She is threatening to hurt Leo. She is threatening your son." At the mention of Leo, Trey's eyes snapped open. But they weren't filled with clarity. They were filled with a wild, frantic panic. He suddenly lashed out. He swung his arm up and knocked the phone out of my hand. It skittered across the floor and slid under the radiator. "Get out!" he screamed. His voice wasn't weak anymore. It was shrill, desperate. "You are trying to ruin everything. You have always tried to ruin us." I stood there stunned. My hand was still raised in the air where he had struck it. "Trey," I whispered. "What are you saying?" "I am saying you are a liar," Trey spat the words out. "Skylar told me you would do this. She told me you would try to manufacture evidence. She told me you would try to split us up because you can't stand seeing us happy. Happy, I shouted, pointing at his leg. You call this happy? You are lying in a hospital bed with a shattered femur and a black eye. She put you here. She didn't put me here. I fell, Trey yelled back, tears streaming down his face. And even if she did hurt me, maybe I deserved it. Maybe I wasn't listening. She is under so much pressure, Dad. You don't understand her. You never tried to understand her. I felt like the floor was tilting under my feet. This was the Stockholm Syndrome talking. This was the voice of a man who had been told day after day that he was worthless, that he was lucky anyone loved him at all. Skylar had hollowed him out and filled him with her own twisted logic. I leaned over the bed, gripping the rails. Son, listen to yourself. You are defending a woman who threatened to kill your child. She didn't mean it, Trey sobbed. She says things when she is stressed. She loves Leo. She is a good mother. You just refuse to see it because she is white. The accusation hit me harder than a physical blow. I recoiled. What did you say? You heard me, Trey said. His face was twisted in an ugly sneer that didn't belong to him. It was Skylar's expression on my son's face. Skylar told me. She said you have never accepted her because she isn't black. She said you are a reverse racist. You think she isn't good enough for your bloodline. You think she is some gold digger just because she is white and pretty. I stared at him. I couldn't breathe. I raised you to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I don't hate her because she is white, Trey. I hate her because she is evil. I hate her because she is breaking my son. You are a liar, Trey screamed. You just want to control me. You want me to be alone and miserable like you. Skylar is the only one who really knows me. She is the only one who helps me. She manages the money because I am bad with numbers. She isolates me from my friends because they were bad influences. She does everything for me. My heart shattered. She wasn't helping him. She was erasing him. She had convinced him that his competence was incompetence. She had convinced him that his isolation was protection. She had convinced him that my love was hate. I reached out to him again. I ignored his anger. I saw the scared little boy hiding behind the angry man's eyes. Trey, please. I am your father. I carried you on my shoulders. I taught you how to build your first model bridge. Trust me. Just this once. Trust me over her. I moved to touch his hand. I wanted to hold him. I wanted to ground him. Don't touch me, Trey shrieked. He swung his arm. It was a reflex, a defensive flail of a terrified animal. But his hand was heavy and hard. His knuckles connected with my cheekbone. The sound was a sickening crack in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side. My glasses flew off my face and clattered onto the floor next to the phone. The sting was immediate and sharp hot blood rushing to the surface of my skin. Silence fell over the room. Absolute suffocating silence. Trey froze. His hand hovered in the air, trembling. He looked at his hand, then he looked at me. His eyes went wide. The anger vanished, replaced by horror. Dad, Trey whispered. Dad, I didn't mean to. I slowly turned my head back to look at him. My cheek was throbbing. I saw the regret in his eyes. I saw the crack in the armor Skylar had built around him. This was the moment. This was the breakthrough. He had hurt his own father, and the shock of it was waking him up. I am okay, son, I said softly. I am okay. We can fix this. I took a step forward. Trey began to sob. He reached out his hand toward me. Dad, I am so sorry. I don't know what is happening to me. Help me. Please, help me. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him I was here, that I wasn't going anywhere. But then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A slow, deliberate clap. Clap, clap, clap. I spun around. Skylar was standing in the doorway. She wasn't wet from the rain. She looked pristine. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. And she was smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the trap snap shut around the prey's neck. She dropped the coffee cups. They hit the floor and exploded, sending hot brown liquid splashing over her white shoes. "Oh my God!" she screamed. Her voice was so loud it hurt my ears. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a siren. A signal. Help! Skylar shrieked, throwing herself backwards into the hallway. Help me, somebody help! He is killing us. He hit the patient. The old man is crazy. Skylar, stop! I shouted, stepping toward her. She fell to the floor, writhing around as if I had pushed her. She ripped the collar of her own blouse, tearing the buttons off. She messed up her hair with frantic hands. Security! she wailed, her voice echoing down the entire hospital wing. He punched his son. Look at his face. He is violent. Save us. I looked back at Trey. He was shrinking into the bed, pulling the sheets up over his head, covering his eyes. He couldn't handle it. He was retreating back into the darkness. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Heavy boots, radios crackling. I stood in the center of the room, my cheek burning from my son's blow, my glasses broken on the floor. I looked at Skylar on the ground, putting on the performance of her life. She stopped screaming for a split second, just long enough to look me dead in the eye. She winked. "Checkmate, Vernon," she mouthed. Then the security guards burst into the room. 2 of them, big men. They didn't ask questions. They saw a screaming woman on the floor and a large black man standing over her. They saw the patient cowering in bed. They made the only assumption society had trained them to make. "Get on the ground," one of them roared, reaching for his taser. "Get on the ground now or I will drop you." I raised my hands slowly. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I looked at the bed one last time. "I will come back for you, Trey," I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "I promise." Then I was slammed against the wall. The cold handcuffs clicked around my wrists. As they dragged me out past Skylar, she was sobbing into the arms of a nurse, but over the nurse's shoulder I saw her lips curve into that same terrifying, triumphant smile. The game had just begun. The security guard slammed me against the wall. The air left my lungs in a sharp whoosh. I felt the cold plaster against my cheek. My arm was twisted behind my back at an angle that made my shoulders scream, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't struggle. I didn't resist. I knew exactly what this looked like. A large black man standing over a crying white woman in a hospital room. The script wrote itself. The guards didn't care about context. They didn't care about the fear in my son's eyes or the triumphant gleam in Skylar's. They only saw a threat. "He is drunk," Skylar wailed from the floor. She had torn her own blouse. She had messed up her perfect blonde hair. She looked like the survivor of a brutal attack. "He has been drinking all day. He came here to hurt us because he hates me. He hit Trey. Look at Trey." I turned my head as much as the guard would allow to look at my son. Trey was curled into a fetal position under the thin hospital blanket. He was shaking. He wasn't confirming her story, but he wasn't denying it either. His silence was the nail in my coffin. "Sir, stop resisting," the guard barked into my ear even though I was standing perfectly still. "I am not resisting," I said calmly. My voice was low, steady. "I am a retired engineer. I have no weapons. I am complying." Skylar sobbed louder. "He is lying. He is violent. Please just get him out of here before he hurts my husband again." The second guard helped Skylar to her feet. She leaned into him, playing the fragile victim perfectly. She looked at me over the guard's shoulder. Her tears were flowing, but her eyes were dry of emotion. They were cold, calculating blue steel. "Get him out of here," the doctor ordered, rushing back into the room. "I am calling the police if he isn't off the premises in 2 minutes." "I don't need the police," I said, straightening my jacket as the guard finally released my arm. "I am leaving." I looked at Skylar one last time. I didn't glare. I didn't shout. I looked at her with the cold precision of a man who had just surveyed a demolition site. I wanted her to know that she hadn't won. She had just started a war she wasn't qualified to fight. I walked out of the room, flanked by the guards. I walked with my head high. The nurses at the station stared at me, whispering behind their hands. I saw Betty, the head nurse, standing by the medication cart. She didn't look at me, but she gave a barely perceptible nod. She knew. She had seen the show. I drove home in silence. The rain had stopped, but the world felt grayer than before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair in the dark, staring at the empty fireplace, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew Skylar. I knew she wouldn't stop at a scene in a hospital. She needed to bury me. She needed to make sure I couldn't save Trey. The knock came at 8 in the morning. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of law enforcement. I opened the door. 2 deputies stood on my porch. One had his hand resting casually near his holster. The other held a sheaf of papers. "Vernon Hayes," the deputy asked. "I am Vernon Hayes. You are being served," the deputy said, thrusting the papers at me. "This is a temporary restraining order issued by the family court. You are hereby ordered to stay 100 yards away from Trey Hayes, Skylar Vance, and Leo Hayes. You are strictly prohibited from contacting them by phone, email, or third party." I took the papers. They felt heavy in my hand like a brick. "On what grounds?" I asked. My voice was raspy from lack of sleep. The deputy looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disdain. Domestic violence, harassment, and endangerment of a vulnerable adult. The petitioner alleges you struck the victim in the face while he was hospitalized. I didn't strike him, I said. It was an accident. He was tell it to the judge. The deputy cut me off, turning around to walk back to his cruiser. The hearing is in 3 days. If you violate this order before then, you will be arrested. Have a nice day, Mr. Hayes. I closed the door. I walked into the kitchen and laid the papers on the table next to my half-eaten toast. The bold letters at the top mocked me. Order of protection. I looked around my house. This was a house I had built with my own hands. On the mantel were photos of Trey. Trey graduating kindergarten with a gap-toothed smile. Trey winning the science fair. Trey holding his newborn son Leo. In every picture I was there, standing just behind him, my hand on his shoulder, promising to protect him. And now a piece of paper signed by a judge who had never met me said I was the danger. I sank into a chair. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. This was America. Skylar knew exactly how to play the game. She knew that a white woman's tears were the most powerful weapon in the legal arsenal, especially when aimed at a black man. She had weaponized the system. She had turned the law, which I respected all my life, into a shield for her abuse. She had taken my son. She had taken my grandson. And now she had taken my good name. I felt a surge of despair so deep it almost drowned me. I wanted to give up. I wanted to sell the house, move to an island, and forget I ever had a family. It would be easier. It would be safer. Then I looked at the photo of Leo again. He has my eyes. He has Trey's smile. Skylar had threatened him. She had said he would have an accident. I couldn't give up. Not for me. For him. I reached for the phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. The voice on the other end was gravelly and familiar. Vernon, the voice said. I was wondering when you would call. I heard about the hospital. Bad news travels fast in this town. I need you, Marshall, I said. Meet me in an hour, the voice replied. Not at the office. The diner on 4th. And Vernon, bring the papers. Marshall was sitting in the back booth of the dusty diner when I arrived. He was a small man, a Jewish lawyer with wild white hair and a suit that looked like he had slept in it. But I knew better. Marshall was a shark. We had worked together when I was fighting patent trolls in the 90s. He didn't care about appearances. He cared about winning. He didn't say hello. He just pointed to the seat opposite him. I slid in. I put the restraining order and the USB drive on the table. I told him everything. I told him about the note from Betty. I told him about the video. I told him about the confrontation and the slap. I told him about Skylar's threat against Leo. Marshall listened while chewing on a toothpick. He didn't interrupt. He stared at me with watery, intelligent eyes. When I finished, silence hung between us over the smell of frying bacon and old coffee. Marshall sighed. He took the toothpick out of his mouth and pointed it at me. Vernon, you are an engineer. You deal in logic, structural integrity, load-bearing walls, if A plus B equals C. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. The law isn't engineering. The law is theater. And right now you are cast in the wrong role. He picked up the restraining order and flicked it with his finger. Look at this. This isn't just a piece of paper. This is a narrative. Skylar Vance has successfully painted a picture. In her story, she is the devoted wife nursing her injured husband. You are the angry, estranged father with a history of control issues who snapped and hit his own son in the ICU. But I have the video I insisted tapping the USB drive. It shows her hurting him. Marshall shook his head slowly. I watched it, Vernon. I watched it 3 times before you got here because Betty sent me a copy too. She is a smart woman, and surely that proves she is abusive, I said. Marshall let out a dry, humorless laugh. To you? Yes. To me? Yes. To a family court judge who sees 50 cases a day? Maybe. Or maybe Skylar's lawyer argues that she was massaging a cramp. Maybe they argue the video is grainy. Maybe they argue you doctored it. He leaned closer, his face serious. Let's be real, Vernon. We have to talk about the elephant in the room. You are a 6'2" black man. Skylar is a petite blonde woman. In the court of public opinion, and often in family court, the bias is baked into the walls. When she cries, people want to hand her a tissue. When you raise your voice, people reach for their guns. I clenched my jaw. I know that, Marshall. I have lived with that my whole life. Then you know that we are starting this race 10 miles behind the starting line, Marshall said. The judge has already signed this order. That means he already believes her version of events is plausible. If we walk into court on Tuesday and just shout that she is a liar, we lose. We lose access to Trey forever. And worse, we lose Leo. So what do we do? I asked, slamming my hand on the table. Do I just let her kill my son slowly? Marshall grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. No, he said. We don't let her do anything, but we don't fight her with anger. We fight her with mud. We need to get Dirty Vernon. We need to find out who Skylar Vance really is. He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. I made some calls this morning. Skylar Vance didn't exist 5 years ago. She popped up in Arizona with a new social security number and a very expensive nose job. Before that, the trail goes cold. I opened the folder. It was thin, just a few printouts. We need a private investigator, Marshall continued. A good one. We need to find the skeletons in her closet because a woman who knows how to break a femur without leaving a bruise didn't learn that in Sunday school. She has done this before, and we need to find the bodies she left behind. I looked at Marshall. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the warm, fuzzy kind of hope. It was the cold steel hope of a weapon being loaded. Find him, I said, closing the folder. I don't care what it costs. Dig up every grave she ever stood over. Marshall nodded and signaled the waitress for more coffee. We will, Vernon, but listen to me carefully. Until we have ironclad proof something so undeniable that even a biased judge can't ignore it, you have to follow this restraining order. You cannot go near that hospital. You cannot call Trey. You have to be invisible. I have to abandon him, I said bitterly. No, Marshall corrected. You have to wait in the tall grass. There is a difference. Let her get comfortable. Let her think she won. Let her get sloppy. Arrogance is the fatal flaw of narcissists, Vernon. She thinks she broke you. She has no idea she just freed up your schedule to hunt her down. I looked out the window of the diner. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I thought of Trey lying in that bed, terrified and alone. I thought of Leo somewhere in that big house with a monster. I will wait, I whispered. But when I strike Marshall, I am not going to leave anything standing. Marshall smiled a grim, shark-like smile. That is why I took the case, Vernon. Now drink your coffee. We have work to do. The house was too quiet. For 3 days, I had lived like a prisoner in my own home. The restraining order sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded gun. Every time I walked past it, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation. I couldn't call my son. I couldn't visit my grandson. I was a ghost in their lives, haunting the edges but unable to touch them. I spent my hours pacing the floorboards I had laid myself years ago, staring at the phone and willing it to ring. I needed Marshall. I needed a lifeline. When the call finally came, it was late. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room. I snatched the phone up on the first ring. Come to the office, Marshall said. His voice was tight-clipped. We have something. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys and drove into the city. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the neon signs of storefronts. It felt like the whole world was crying, and I was just trying to keep my head above water. Marshall's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky elevators and frosted glass doors. When I walked in, Marshall was sitting behind his desk surrounded by stacks of paper. But it was the look on his face that stopped me cold. He didn't look like a lawyer who had found a loophole. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Sit down, Vernon Marshall said, pointing to the leather chair opposite him. I sat. My heart was hammering against my ribs. What is it, Marshall? Did you find her past? Marshall didn't speak. He slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. I opened it. The first page wasn't a legal document. It was a photograph, a mugshot. The woman in the picture had dark hair, not blonde. Her nose was slightly different, a little wider at the bridge. But the eyes were the same. Those cold, calculating blue eyes that had stared at me in the hospital room. Who is this? I asked, my finger tracing the face in the photo. That Marshall said, leaning back in his chair, is Sarah Jenkins. I looked up at him confused. Who is Sarah Jenkins? That is your daughter-in-law, Marshall replied. Skylar Vance does not exist, Vernon. She is a fabrication, a ghost created 3 years ago in Arizona. But Sarah Jenkins. Sarah has a history, and it is a history written in blood. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty office. I turned the page. It was a copy of a death certificate from the state of Texas, dated 2 years ago. Name of deceased, Arthur Penhaligon, age 72. Cause of death, blunt force trauma, accidental fall. I looked at Marshall. My mouth felt dry. Accidental fall. Marshall nodded slowly. Arthur was a wealthy man, Vernon. Oil money. He met Sarah at a gala in Houston. They were married 6 months later. He was lonely. She was beautiful and attentive. Does that sound familiar? It sounds exactly like Trey, I whispered. Marshall leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. 2 months after the wedding, Arthur fell down the stairs of his mansion. He broke his neck. The police investigated, but there were no witnesses. Sarah was the only one home. She told the investigators that Arthur was clumsy, that he had been drinking. She cried. She played the grieving widow perfectly. The coroner ruled it an accident. And the money, I asked, knowing the answer before he said it. She inherited everything, Marshall said. $2 million in liquid assets plus the estate. She sold the house within a week of the funeral. $2 million, I repeated. That is a lot of money. Where did it go? Why is she after Trey's money if she has millions? Marshall flipped to the next section of the file. It was a spreadsheet filled with numbers and dates. Because Sarah Jenkins has a vice, Vernon, a very expensive vice. She is addicted to high-stakes online gambling, crypto casinos, unregulated offshore poker sites. She blew through Arthur's fortune in 18 months. She lost $50,000 a hand some nights. By the time she met Trey, she wasn't just broke. She was in debt to some very dangerous people. I stared at the numbers. They were staggering. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a desperate addict. And desperate addicts are dangerous. They don't have limits. She isn't loving Trey, I said, my voice trembling with rage. She is harvesting him. Exactly, Marshall said. Trey is her new bankroll, and the insurance policy on Trey's life, the one you set up for him years ago. It is worth $500,000, I said. Marshall nodded grimly. If Trey dies from an accident, she gets that payout, plus whatever equity is in the house, plus whatever she can siphon from Leo's trust if she gets guardianship. Vernon, you aren't dealing with a bad wife. You are dealing with the Black Widow. She killed Arthur, and now she is breaking Trey down piece by piece, preparing him for his own accident. I slammed the folder shut. The image of Skylar twisting Trey's broken leg flashed in my mind. It wasn't just torture, it was practice. She was testing his limits. She was establishing a medical history of clumsiness so that when he finally fell down those stairs for the last time, the police would just nod and say, "What a tragedy." We have to go to the police, I said, standing up. We have to show them this. She is using a fake identity. That is fraud. It is not that simple, Marshall said, raising a hand to stop me. She changed her name legally. We checked. It was a rushed job in a county clerk's office in Nevada, but it is legal. Being a widow who lost money gambling isn't a crime. We can't prove she pushed Arthur. The Texas police closed that case. If we go to the authorities now with just this, she will claim we are digging up her tragic past to smear her. She will say she changed her name to escape the grief. She will spin it, Vernon. She is a master spinner. So what do we do, I demanded. Do we just wait for my son to die? No. Marshall set his eyes hard. We use this. We know her weakness now. She is desperate for money. That means she is prone to making mistakes. We need to catch her in the act of something undeniable. We need to catch her admitting to the fraud or the abuse on tape. And we need to protect Leo. If she feels cornered, she might use the boy as leverage. I left Marshall's office feeling heavier than when I arrived. The knowledge was a burden. My son was sleeping next to a murderer, a woman who had watched a man die at the bottom of a staircase and then went shopping with his money. I walked to my truck, the city sounds muffled by the blood pounding in my ears. I unlocked the door and climbed in. As I reached for the ignition, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a call, it was a text message. The number was blocked. Unknown caller. I opened the message. The screen glowed bright in the dark cab. I know you are digging, Vernon. I have friends in low places too. Stop looking into things that don't concern you. People who ask too many questions tend to have bad luck. It would be a shame if little Leo had an accident at the playground. Slides can be so slippery this time of year, just like stairs. I stared at the words. My breath caught in my throat. She knew. She knew I had hired an investigator. She was watching me just as closely as I was watching her, and she had just crossed the final line. Threatening me was one thing. Threatening Trey was another. But threatening Leo, my innocent 5-year-old grandson. I gripped the phone so tight I thought the screen would crack. Fear was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly resolve. A calm that only comes when you realize there is no turning back. You want a war. Sarah Jenkins, I whispered to the empty truck using her real name for the first time. You want to talk about accidents? I started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was the only answer I needed. I wasn't going to let Leo go down a slide. I wasn't going to let Trey fall down the stairs. I was going to take this woman's house of cards and bring it crashing down on top of her head. I put the truck in gear and drove into the night. The hunter had just become the hunted, and she had no idea that the old engineer she mocked knew exactly how to dismantle a bomb without it blowing up in his face. I was coming for her, and I was bringing the ghosts of her past with me. 2 days after I hired the private investigator, the phone rang at 3 a.m. It was not the kind of ring that brings good news. It was the shrill, insistent cry of emergency. I fumbled for the receiver in the dark, my heart already pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I expected it to be Marshall or maybe the police telling me I had violated the restraining order by breathing too loud. It was Betty, the head nurse. "Vernon, you need to listen to me, and you need to listen good," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. I have never heard Betty tremble. She was a woman who stared down trauma surgeons and unruly patients without blinking. But tonight she sounded terrified. "What is it, Betty?" I asked, sitting up and switching on the lamp. "Is it Trey? He is in a coma." "Vernon," she said. "He went into septic shock an hour ago. His organs are shutting down." The phone slipped in my sweaty hand. Septic shock. That didn't make sense. He had a broken leg, a clean break. He was in a sterile ICU environment surrounded by the best antibiotics money could buy. How I demanded. How does a healthy 32-year-old man get sepsis from a fracture in a top-tier hospital? Betty hesitated. I could hear the background noise of the hospital, the beeping of alarms, the squeak of shoes. The toxicology report came back with traces of fecal matter in the wound site. She whispered so low I barely heard her. "It wasn't an airborne infection, Vernon. Someone introduced a contaminant directly into his bloodstream through the IV port or the surgical site. It was massive and it was fast. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't negligence. It was biological warfare. Skylar, she hadn't just broken his leg. She was trying to kill him. Or worse, she was trying to keep him invalid. Is he going to make it? I asked, my voice breaking. We have him on broad-spectrum antibiotics and pressors to keep his blood pressure up, Betty said. But he is critical, and Vernon Skylar is here. She is putting on quite a show. She is screaming at the doctors, blaming them for the infection, threatening to sue the hospital for malpractice. She is creating a chaotic diversion so no one looks too closely at how the bacteria got there. I hung up the phone. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. My son was dying. He was lying in a bed miles away, drowning in his own blood because a monster was injecting poison into him. And I was trapped. If I went there, the police would arrest me. If I didn't go there, he might die alone. I was paralyzed by the cruelty of the system. I was an engineer. I could fix broken bridges. I could shore up collapsing foundations, but I couldn't fix this. I couldn't engineer my way out of a court order that protected the killer and handcuffed the savior. The sun rose, but it brought no light. It only brought the lawyers. At 9 o'clock, Marshall called. He didn't say hello. "Check your email, Vernon," he said. His voice was grim. I opened my laptop. There was a new document in my inbox, a legal filing stamped with the seal of the state family court. Petition for emergency conservatorship. I read the legal jargon, my eyes burning. Skylar Vance was petitioning the court to take full control over Trey Hayes, not just medical power of attorney, conservatorship, the same legal shackle that they used on dementia patients or celebrities who had lost their minds. She is arguing that Trey is incapacitated, Marshall explained over the speakerphone. Since he is in a coma, he cannot make decisions for himself or his estate. She is his wife, so she is the primary candidate. If the judge grants this Vernon, she becomes him. She controls his medical care, she controls who visits him, and most importantly, she controls his assets. But Trey doesn't have that many liquid assets, I argued. The house is in his name, but I pay the mortgage. It is not about the house, Marshall said. It is about the trust. The trust you set up for Leo. I froze. I had established an irrevocable trust for my grandson Leo the day he was born. I put a significant portion of my life savings into it along with the royalties from my patents. It was meant to pay for his college, his first home, his future. It was worth nearly $3 million. Skylar found the loophole. Marshall continued. The trust stipulates that if the beneficiary is a minor, the father Trey acts as the trustee. If Trey is incapacitated, the guardian of the father assumes the role of trustee until the father recovers or the child comes of age. I felt sick. It was a long game, a master plan. She didn't just want Trey's life insurance. She wanted the generational wealth I had built for my grandson. She had induced a coma to render Trey legally incompetent so she could raid the piggy bank. Can we stop it? I asked. We can try, Marshall said, but his voice lacked confidence. The hearing is expedited because it is a medical emergency. She is going to argue that she needs access to funds to pay for his life-saving treatment. No judge wants to be the one who denied a dying man care. She has us cornered Vernon. She created the emergency to justify the theft. I closed the laptop. I walked to the window. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. A storm was coming. I am going there, I said. Vernon, no, Marshall shouted. If you violate that order today of all days, she will use it in the hearing tomorrow. She will paint you as erratic and dangerous. You will lose everything. I don't care, I whispered. I need to see him. I need to know he is still breathing. I hung up. I didn't take my truck. The truck was too recognizable. I took the old sedan I kept under a tarp in the garage, a car I hadn't driven in years. I drove through the pouring rain, the wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the glass. I parked across the street from the hospital. I couldn't go in. The restraining order said 100 yards. I parked exactly 105 yards away. I knew the distance. I had measured it on the satellite map before I left. I got out of the car. The rain was torrential. It soaked through my coat in seconds, chilling me to the bone. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the third floor. I knew which room was his. Room 304. The light was on. I stood there for an hour, just an old man standing in a storm keeping a vigil for a son he couldn't touch. I prayed. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I asked him to keep Trey's heart beating. I asked him to give me the strength not to storm that building and strangle her with my bare hands. Then I saw movement in the window. The blinds parted. A figure appeared. It was Skylar. She was wearing a hospital gown over her clothes, probably to protect herself from the fluids or maybe to look like she had been sleeping by his side. She looked out into the darkness. I don't know if she could see me. I was standing in the shadows under a street lamp that had flickered out, but she knew. She knew I would be there. She knew I wouldn't leave him. She pressed her hand against the glass, then she raised it. She waved. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was a slow, deliberate motion of her fingers. A taunt, a victory lap. She was standing over my comatose son, safe in her tower of lies, protected by the very laws I had followed all my life, and she was mocking me. She knew she had won the round. She had the coma. She had the petition. She had the police on her side. She was telling me that I could stand in the rain all I wanted, but she was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. I stared at her. Rain dripped from my nose and chin, mixing with the tears I refused to wipe away. I didn't wave back. I didn't scream. I just etched that image into my mind. The blonde woman in the window waving while my son fought for every breath. I will not forget this, Skylar, I whispered to the wind. You think you are waving at a defeated man, but you are waving at the storm that is coming for you. I turned around and walked back to the car. I was soaked. I was cold. I was legally helpless, but as I turned the key in the ignition, I felt a fire in my belly that the rain couldn't extinguish. She wanted full control. Fine. I would let her take the wheel. I would let her think she was driving the car. She didn't know that I was the one who built the road, and I knew exactly where the cliff was. I drove home. I didn't dry off. I went straight to the basement. I pulled out my old schematics. I pulled out my soldering iron. If the law wouldn't help me, I would have to use the only weapon I had left, my mind. Betty had said Skylar was creating a diversion. Marshall had said she was prone to mistakes. Tomorrow at the hearing, she would expect an angry father. She would expect an outburst. She wasn't going to get one. She was going to get silence. Because I was done talking, I was preparing the trap. And when she stepped into it, there would be no judge to save her. The family court building was a place designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were too high, the lights were too fluorescent, and the air smelled of floor wax and broken promises. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped tightly together to stop them from shaking. Marshall sat next to me shuffling papers, but I could tell by the set of his jaw that he wasn't optimistic. We were walking into an ambush. The judge was a man named Harrison. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen too many angry fathers and too many crying mothers and had decided long ago that the mothers were usually right. He didn't look at me when he entered. He looked at the clock on the wall as if calculating how soon he could go to lunch. Skylar's lawyer stood up. He was a slick man in a suit that cost more than my truck. He didn't just speak, he performed. He walked back and forth in front of the judge, gesturing at me like I was a dangerous animal in a cage. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We are here today to discuss the safety and financial security of Mr. Trey Hayes, a man currently lying in a coma fighting for his life, and standing in the way of that safety is his father, Vernon Hayes." I felt the heat rise in my neck. I wanted to stand up and shout that I was the only one trying to save him. But Marshall's hand clamped down on my knee, a silent warning to stay frozen. The lawyer continued, "Mr. Hayes paints himself as a concerned patriarch, but the evidence suggests something far more sinister. We have sworn affidavits from neighbors stating that Vernon was a strict, unyielding father. We have records showing that after his wife passed away, Vernon became isolated, bitter, and controlling. He couldn't control his grief, so he controlled his son. And now that his son has found happiness with my client, Vernon cannot stand it." He paused for dramatic effect, turning to look at me with mock pity. "This is a man who assaulted his son in the ICU, Your Honor. A man who sees enemies everywhere. A man who holds the purse strings of his grandson's trust fund like a weapon. He is not a savior. He is a stressor. And stress is the last thing Trey Hayes needs right now." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. They were taking my life, my sacrifices, my discipline, and twisting them into abuse. They were taking the fact that I raised a black boy to be tough in a hard world and calling it cruelty. Then it was Skylar's turn. She didn't walk to the witness stand. She floated. She wore a modest black dress that made her look pale and fragile. She carried a tissue in her hand, which she twisted nervously. When she sat down, she looked at the judge with wide, watery eyes. Mrs. Hayes, the lawyer, asked softly, "Why are you asking for emergency conservatorship today?" Skylar took a shaky breath. A tear slipped down her cheek, perfectly timed. "Because I love my husband," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I just want him to live. The doctors say he needs specialized treatments that insurance won't fully cover. We need access to his funds to pay for them." "But Vernon—" She stopped and looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Vernon has always controlled the money. He thinks Trey is incompetent. He thinks I am incompetent. He would rather sit on a pile of gold than spend a dime to save his own son." Liar, I thought. The words screamed in my head. She continued her sob story. "I am scared, Your Honor. I am scared that if Vernon stays in charge, Trey will die. And I am scared for myself. He threatened me. He looked at me with such hate in the hospital. I just want to protect my family. Please help me." She buried her face in her hands and wept. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was the damsel in distress, and I was the dragon. Marshall stood up to cross-examine her. He tried to bring up the inconsistencies. He tried to bring up her gambling debts. "Objection," Skylar's lawyer shouted. "Irrelevant. We are here to discuss the immediate medical crisis, not to smear the character of a grieving wife." "Sustained," Judge Harrison said, waving his hand dismissively. "Move on, counselor." Marshall tried again. He tried to introduce the video. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the petitioner has physically abused the patient." The judge peered over his glasses. "Is this the same video that the police already reviewed and dismissed as inconclusive?" "Yes, but—" Marshall started. "Then, I am not interested," the judge cut him off. "If the police didn't charge her, I am not going to relitigate it here. This is an emergency hearing regarding assets and medical decision-making." I felt the room spin. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed. It was designed to process cases quickly, not to find the truth. And the quickest way to process this case was to give the crying white woman what she wanted, so everyone could go home. The judge banged his gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Based on the testimony and the urgent medical needs of the patient, I am granting temporary emergency conservatorship of Trey Hayes and his estate to his wife Skylar Vance. The restraining order against Mr. Vernon Hayes is upheld and extended for 60 days. Mr. Hayes, you are to turn over all financial documents related to the Hayes Family Trust within 24 hours. Court is adjourned. Skylar didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just nodded weakly and dabbed her eyes. She played the part until the very end. I stood up. My legs felt heavy like lead. I had lost. I had walked into that room hoping for justice, and I had been stripped of my rights, my dignity, and my son. Marshall started packing his briefcase, his face grim. "We will appeal, Vernon," he whispered. "This isn't over." But it felt over. By the time an appeal went through, Skylar could drain the accounts and pull the plug on Trey. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was crowded with people, lawyers, clients, bailiffs. I felt like a ghost walking through them. Then I saw her. Skylar was standing near the water fountain talking to her lawyer. She saw me coming. She said something to her lawyer, and he walked away, giving her a moment alone. She waited for me. As I walked past, she didn't shrink away. She didn't look scared. She stepped into my path. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dry now. The tears had evaporated the moment the judge left the bench. "I told you, Vernon," she whispered. Her voice was low, a hiss only I could hear. "You should have stayed home. Now I own him. I own the house. I own the trust. And you are just a visitor in my world." She smiled. It was the same smile she gave me at the hospital. A smile of pure arrogance. "Go home, old man, before I take your truck too." Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't a snap of rage. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place, the final tumbler falling. I stopped. I turned my body so I was looming over her. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. I let her see the darkness in my eyes. I let her see the engineer who knew how to dismantle mountains. "You made a mistake, Skylar," I said. My voice was a rumble of thunder from a distant storm. She scoffed. "Did I? I think I just won." "You confused silence with defeat," I continued. "You confused patience with weakness. You think you stripped me of my weapons because you took away the law. But you forgot who I am." I took a step closer, forcing her to take a step back. Her smile faltered just a fraction. "I built the foundation this city stands on. I know where the pipes are buried. I know where the weak points are. You just took the keys to the kingdom, but you didn't check to see if the castle was rigged to blow." "Vernon, you are threatening me again," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "No," I said. "I am promising you. You didn't just win a lawsuit, Skylar. You just woke up a monster, and this monster doesn't care about court orders." I straightened up. I adjusted my jacket. "Enjoy the money while you can. Because I am coming for it, and I am coming for you." I walked away. I didn't look back. I heard her gasp, but I kept walking. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding sunlight. I had lost the battle, but the war had just shifted to a new battlefield. A battlefield where lawyers didn't matter. A battlefield where I was the general. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Betty. "Is the bear ready?" I asked. "Yes, Vernon," she replied. "Leo is coming to visit tomorrow." "Good," I said. "The Trojan horse is in play." I hung up. Skylar Vance thought she had buried me. She didn't realize she had just buried a seed, and the harvest was going to be bitter. The diner was located 10 miles outside the city limits. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for pie and coffee at 3 in the morning, and where nobody asked questions. I sat in the back booth facing the door. My hands were wrapped around a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I wasn't there for the food. I was there for a conspiracy. The bell above the door chimed. Betty walked in. She wasn't wearing her scrubs. She was wearing a heavy wool coat and a hat pulled low over her face. She looked nervous. For 30 years, this woman had run an ICU like a military operation, but today she looked like a fugitive. She slid into the booth opposite me and didn't make eye contact until the waitress had dropped off a menu and left. "Did anyone follow you?" I asked, my voice low. Betty shook her head. "No. Skylar is too busy giving interviews to the local news. She is painting herself as the saintly wife keeping a vigil for her comatose husband. She doesn't have time to watch an old nurse." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table under the sugar dispenser. "Here is the schedule," Betty whispered. "Skylar brings Leo to the hospital every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. She times it for when the visiting hours are busiest, so people see her being a good mother. She brings a photographer sometimes. It is sickening, Vernon. She uses that boy like a prop." I took the envelope. My hand brushed hers. Her skin was rough from years of scrubbing up for surgery, but her grip was warm. "How is he?" I asked. "How is Leo?" "He is quiet," Betty said, and her voice cracked. "Too quiet for a 5-year-old. He looks scared, Vernon. He flinches when Skylar raises her hand to fix her hair. She isn't hitting him where people can see, but she is terrorizing that child. I can see it in his eyes. He needs his grandfather." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "I can't get to him, Betty. The restraining order is ironclad. If I step foot in that hospital while she is there, the police will arrest me before I can even say hello." "That is why you aren't going to step foot in there," Betty said. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You are going to give me something to give to him. Something that Skylar won't suspect. Something that will let you watch over him even when you are miles away." I nodded slowly. The plan was already forming in my mind. It was a dangerous plan. It was illegal. It violated wiretapping laws, privacy laws, and the court order. If I got caught, I would go to federal prison. But I looked at Betty. I looked at the fear in the eyes of a woman who had seen everything, and I knew I had no choice. "I will have it ready by tonight," I said. "Can you get it to him tomorrow?" Betty nodded. "Make it look innocent, Vernon. Skylar checks everything. She is paranoid." I left the diner and drove home through the back roads. The rain had started again, a relentless gray drizzle that matched my mood. When I got home, I didn't go to the kitchen or the bedroom. I went straight to the basement. This was my sanctuary, my laboratory. The walls were lined with shelves of components, circuit boards, soldering irons, and blueprints. This was where I had invented the sensors that monitored pressure in deep-sea oil pipelines. This was where I had built the legacy that Skylar was trying to steal. I walked to the storage closet in the back. I dug through a box of old keepsakes until I found it. It was a teddy bear. It wasn't just any bear. It was Mr. Bear. I had bought it for Trey when he was 3 years old. It had been his constant companion through thunderstorms and nightmares. When Leo was born, Trey had passed it down to him. It was worn in spots. The fur was matted from years of love. One eye was slightly scratched. It smelled of dust and memories. I placed the bear on my workbench under the magnifying lamp. I looked at its innocent button eyes. I felt a pang of guilt. I was about to desecrate a family heirloom. I was about to turn a symbol of love into a tool of espionage. "Forgive me, Mr. Bear," I whispered, "but we have a job to do." I picked up a scalpel. My hand was steady. It was the same hand that had soldered microchips the size of a grain of rice. I made a precise incision along the seam of the bear's back, carefully cutting the threads so I wouldn't damage the fabric. I pulled out a handful of white stuffing. Then I turned to my electronics bin. I didn't use store-bought equipment. Skylar might sweep the house for bugs using a standard detector. I needed something custom, something passive, something that operated on a frequency that consumer scanners wouldn't pick up. I pulled out a prototype transmitter I had been working on years ago for industrial inspections. It was designed to transmit audio through thick concrete and steel. It was smaller than a matchbook. I modified the power source, wiring it to a high-density lithium battery that I had harvested from a military-grade flashlight. It would last for 3 weeks without needing a charge. I soldered the connections. The smell of melting rosin filled the air, a sharp metallic scent that focused my mind. I attached a microphone with noise cancellation capabilities. It was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from across a room, but smart enough to filter out the hum of a refrigerator or the noise of traffic. I wrapped the entire assembly in a thin layer of rubber foam to prevent it from clicking or feeling hard if Leo hugged the bear too tight. I embedded it deep in the center of the stuffing, right where the bear's heart would be. I packed the stuffing back in, arranging it so the bear felt natural, soft, huggable. Then came the most critical part, the stitching. If Skylar saw a fresh seam, she would know. I threaded a needle with thread I had distressed to match the faded color of the original stitching. I used a surgical suture technique, creating a hidden stitch that vanished into the fur. I worked for 2 hours, closing a 3-inch incision. When I was done, I brushed the fur with a toothbrush to blend the texture. I held the bear up. It looked exactly as it had this morning. Old, loved, harmless. But inside it was a listening station. It was a lifeline. It was a Trojan horse. I tested the receiver. I put the bear on the workbench and walked upstairs to the attic. I put on my headphones. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the basement. I could hear the furnace kicking on. The audio was crystal clear. I turned off the lights in the basement. I sat there in the dark holding Mr. Bear. I felt like a criminal. I felt like a spy. But mostly I felt like a grandfather who was willing to burn down the world to save his blood. The next afternoon, I parked my old sedan 3 blocks away from the hospital. I couldn't get closer. I sat with the receiver in my lap waiting. At 2 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Betty. Target in sight. I put on the headphones. All I heard was static and the rustling of fabric. Betty must be carrying the bear in her bag. Then suddenly light and sound flooded the feed. "Oh, look who is here." Betty's voice came through loud and clear. "It is my favorite little man." I held my breath. "Hello," Nurse Schuyler's voice cut in. It was sharp, impatient. "We are in a hurry. The photographer is waiting in the lobby. I just wanted to give Leo something," Betty said quickly. Her voice was smooth, soothing. "I found this in the lost and found box from months ago. I think Trey brought it in during one of his checkups before the accident. I thought Leo might want it for comfort." There was a pause, a terrifying silence. I could hear the rustle of Schuyler's expensive clothes. I could imagine her looking at the old dirty bear with disgust. "You," Schuyler said. "It looks filthy. We don't want that old thing. Leo has plenty of new toys." "Please, Mommy." Leo's small voice spoke up. It sounded so fragile it broke my heart. "It is Mr. Bear. Daddy gave him to me. Please." I gripped the steering wheel. "Please, Schuyler. Have a heart. Just once." "Fine," Schuyler sighed. "But don't blame me if you get germs. Just take it so we can go. Smile for the camera, Leo, and hold the bear down so it doesn't ruin your outfit." I heard the soft thud of the bear being grabbed by small hands, then a muffled sound. Leo was hugging it. He was pressing his face into the fur right where the microphone was. "I miss you," Grandpa, Leo whispered. It was so quiet Schuyler didn't hear it, but I heard it. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. "I am here, Leo," I whispered back to the empty car. "Grandpa is right here." The audio shifted. I heard the click of heels on tile. I heard the distant ding of an elevator. The Trojan horse was inside. Schuyler Vance thought she had built a fortress. She thought she had locked me out. She didn't know that I was now riding in the arms of her hostage, listening to every breath she took. I drove home, but I didn't take the headphones off. I listened as she shoved Leo into the car. I listened as she dropped the act and cursed at the traffic. I listened as she made a phone call to a number I didn't recognize. "Yeah, I got the guardianship," she said into her car's Bluetooth system. "The old man is neutered. I will have the cash transfer authorized by Friday. Get the table ready. I am feeling lucky." I hit the record button on my laptop. "Got you," I whispered. The game had changed. She wasn't fighting a helpless father anymore. She was fighting a surveillance state of one, and the evidence was about to start pouring in. My basement used to be a place of creation. It was where I designed suspension bridges and tested the tensile strength of steel cables. The air down here usually smelled of sawdust and ozone, but tonight it smelled of stale coffee and fear. I sat in the dark, illuminated only by the blue glow of my laptop screen and the blinking red light of the receiver. The headphones were clamped tight over my ears. They were my lifeline. They were the only thread connecting me to the house I built, the house where my enemies were sleeping. I had been listening for 6 hours. My back ached, my eyes were burning, but I didn't dare take the headphones off. The audio feed from the teddy bear was crystal clear. It was a window into hell. For the first 2 hours, I listened to the mundane sounds of a household, the refrigerator humming, the HVAC system kicking on. But then the human sounds started, and they were far worse. I heard Schuyler on the phone. She wasn't calling doctors. She wasn't calling family. She was calling a bookie. "I need more time," she hissed into her phone. Her voice was unrecognizable from the sweet tone she used in court. "Listen to me, Tony. I have the conservatorship. The judge signed it yesterday. The money is coming. I just need to liquidate some assets." I listened as she argued about spreads and vigorish. I listened as she admitted to losing $50,000 on a single football game. She wasn't grieving. She was panicking. She was a rat trapped in a corner, and she was willing to eat her own young to survive. Then I heard Leo. My grandson's voice was small and trembling. "Mommy, I am hungry. Can I have a sandwich?" Skylar didn't hang up the phone. She just screamed. "Get away from me, Leo. Can't you see I am on the phone? Go drink some water. There is peanut butter in the pantry. Figure it out. You are 5 years old, not a baby." I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. My grandson was starving in a house full of food while that woman gambled away his inheritance. I wanted to run up those stairs. I wanted to drive my truck through the front door, but I froze. I looked at the recording software running on my screen. The waveform was capturing every spike in volume, every cruel word. I had to wait. I had to let her dig the hole deeper. Around 8 o'clock, the atmosphere in the house changed. I heard the heavy thud of the front door opening. I heard the wheels of a wheelchair squeaking on the hardwood floors. Trey was home. He had been discharged early, probably because Skylar insisted on it. It was easier to control him at home than in a hospital full of nurses. I heard his breathing. It was wet and ragged. He was still recovering from sepsis. He shouldn't be out of bed, let alone being wheeled around like a prop. "Welcome home, darling," Skylar said. Her voice was mocking. "It is so good to have you back where you belong." "I am tired," Skylar Trey whispered. His voice was so weak it broke my heart. "I just want to sleep. My leg hurts." "We have business to discuss first," Skylar said. I heard the rustle of paper. Thick, heavy paper. I listened intently. I turned up the gain on the microphone. "What is this?" Trey asked. "It is the deed to the house," Skylar said, "and the transfer forms for the trust. Since you are incapacitated, I am handling the finances. But the bank is being difficult. They want your signature to expedite the sale. They say that since you are awake now, the conservatorship has a gray area. So just sign it. Sell the house." Trey asked. His voice rose slightly in panic. "Skylar, we can't sell the house. My dad built this house. Leo grew up here. Where will we go? We are moving to a condo downtown." Skylar lied smoothly. "It will be easier for you. No stairs. Now sign the paper, Trey." "I have a buyer coming tomorrow morning." "No," Trey said. I heard the sound of the paper being pushed away. "I am not signing. You can't sell my dad's house." I held my breath. This was it. The resistance. The silence that followed was terrifying. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall in their living room. Then I heard Skylar laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, dry sound like dead leaves scraping on pavement. "You think you have a choice?" she asked. "I am your husband," Trey said, trying to sound strong. "I own this house." "You are a cripple," Skylar spat. "You are a junkie. That is what I told the doctors. That is why you have sepsis. I told them you were injecting drugs into your leg to manage the pain. That is why they discharged you so fast. They think you are an addict, Trey. No one will believe you." "You are lying," Trey cried. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need the money," Skylar screamed. The facade cracked completely. She wasn't manipulating him anymore. She was bulldozing him. "I have debts, Trey. Real debts. People who break legs for a living, not just for fun like me." Trey gasped. You broke my leg on purpose." "Of course I did," Skylar said casually as if discussing the weather. "And I will break the other one if you don't pick up that pen." "I am calling the police," Trey stammered. "I am calling my dad." Skylar moved. I heard the wheelchair scrape violently against the floor. She must have grabbed him. "You aren't calling anyone," she hissed. Her voice was right next to the bear now. The audio was peaking, turning red on my screen. "Listen to me, you pathetic little man. You think you know me. You don't know anything. You think Arthur died by accident." My heart stopped. Arthur. Her first husband. Marshall had suspected it, but we had no proof. Arthur fell down the stairs. Skylar continued, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "That is what the police think. But do you want to know the truth, Trey? Do you want to know why he fell?" "No," Trey whimpered. "Please, Skylar, stop." "He was cheap," she shouted. "He wouldn't give me the money. He tried to cut me off. He tried to divorce me, so I pushed him. I looked him right in the eye and I shoved him, and I watched him tumble all the way down, and you know what I felt when his neck snapped?" Silence. "I felt rich," she whispered. I stared at the screen. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. She had just confessed to murder. It was recorded. It was digital. It was permanent. Now sign the paper, she commanded. Or do you want to end up like Arthur? Do you want Leo to end up like Arthur? Don't touch Leo. Trey screamed. Then sign it. I heard a slap, a meaty wet sound of flesh on flesh. Trey cried out. She hit him again and again. I could hear the blows landing on his bruised face. I could hear him sobbing, begging her to stop. Please, Skylar, I will sign. I will sign. Just stop hitting me. Good boy, she panted. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. It was the sound of my son signing away his legacy to save his life. I ripped the headphones off my head. I couldn't listen anymore. I threw them onto the desk. I stood up and paced the small basement room like a caged tiger. I was hyperventilating. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab my shotgun and go, to storm that house and end her. But I stopped. I forced myself to breathe. I forced the engineer to take over. If I went there now, I would be arrested for violating the restraining order. Skylar would claim self-defense. She would say Trey attacked her and she had to subdue him. She would say the recording was illegal because I wiretapped a private residence without consent. Marshall had warned me about this. In our state, unauthorized recordings were inadmissible in court unless they fell under very specific exceptions. If I played this for the police, they might arrest me for stalking before they arrested her for murder. The recording was leverage, not a silver bullet. I couldn't just hand it over. I needed her to act. I needed her to believe she had won so completely that she would step into the light. I sat back down. My hands were still trembling, but my mind was clear. I saved the audio file. I made 3 backup copies. 1 to the cloud, 1 to a hard drive, 1 to an encrypted server Marshall had set up. I looked at the waveform on the screen. That jagged line was her confession. It was the key to her cell. I picked up the phone and texted Marshall. 3 words. We have it. Then I texted Betty. Is Leo safe? A minute later, Betty replied. She put him to bed. She is drinking wine in the kitchen. She thinks she won. I stared at the screen. Skylar Vance thought she had just intimidated her husband into submission. She thought the signing of that deed was the end of her financial troubles. She didn't know that she had just signed her own death warrant. She had confessed to a capital crime. I leaned back in my chair. The rage was still there, burning hot and bright, but now it was controlled. It was fuel. Tomorrow I would initiate the final phase, the honeypot. I would lure her out of that house. I would make her think she was coming to pick the carcass of a dead man. And when she arrived, she wouldn't find a victim. She would find a judge, a jury, and an executioner. Sleep well, Skylar, I whispered to the silent basement. Because tomorrow you wake up in a nightmare. The basement was cold, but my mind was burning with a feverish intensity. I had the recording. I had the confession. I had the proof that Skylar Vance was a murderer who had killed for money before and was actively torturing my son to do it again. But Marshall was right. In the eyes of the law, a recording made without consent in a private residence was a gray area. A good defense attorney could argue it was doctored or inadmissible. They could drag this out for years while Skylar drained the accounts and Trey rotted away. We didn't need a gray area. We needed a spotlight. We needed to catch her doing something so undeniable that no amount of crying in court could save her. I called Marshall at dawn. I told him the plan. He was silent for a long time. It is risky, Vernon Marshall said. If she realizes it is a setup, she will go underground. She will take the money and disappear, and you might never see Trey or Leo again. She won't realize it, I said, looking at the blueprints on my wall. Because she suffers from the same flaw as every other structural failure I have ever analyzed. She is arrogant. She thinks she has already won. We just need to give her the victory she is expecting. We initiated the honeypot protocol an hour later. We needed a stage. Marshall had a connection at a private palliative care clinic on the outskirts of the city. It was a discreet place used by wealthy families who wanted privacy at the end of their lives. We rented the entire East Wing. We brought in equipment, monitors, ventilators, cameras. Then came the hardest part, the transformation. I lay in the hospital bed while a makeup artist from a local theater group, a friend of Betty's, went to work. She applied a gray pallor to my skin. She shadowed my eyes to make them look sunken. She dried out my lips. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Vernon Hayes, the engineer. I saw a corpse waiting for the tag. Betty hooked me up to the monitors. She set the heart rate to a thready, irregular rhythm. The ventilator hissed rhythmically, pushing air into my lungs. It was terrifying to lie there perfectly healthy, pretending to be at death's door. It felt like I was tempting fate. Then Marshall made the call. He didn't call Skylar directly. That would be suspicious. He called the hospital where Trey had been treated. He told them that Vernon Hayes had suffered a massive hemorrhagic stroke brought on by stress. He told them I was brain dead and that life support would be terminated within 24 hours. He knew that Skylar had alerts set up on my medical file. He knew she had contacts in billing who would leak the information to her. We sat in the dim room and waited. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Across town in the house that I built, Skylar Vance was getting the news. I could imagine the scene perfectly. I knew her mind better than she knew it herself. She would be in the kitchen, probably drinking a mimosa, celebrating the deed Trey had signed the night before. Her phone would buzz. She would read the message. Vernon Hayes. Massive stroke. Terminal. She wouldn't cry. Her heart rate wouldn't even jump. Her mind would instantly shift to calculation. She would do the math. If Vernon dies today, she would think. If he dies without a will. I hadn't updated my will in 10 years. She knew that. She had probably snooped through my legal filings. Under state law, if a widower dies intestate, his entire estate passes to his only child, Trey. And who controlled Trey? She did. She had the emergency conservatorship. If I died right now, every penny of my patent royalties, every acre of land I owned, and the control of Leo's trust would flow directly into Trey's accounts. Accounts that she had full legal authority to drain. It was the jackpot. It was the payout she had killed Arthur for, but missed. It was the ultimate victory. But there was a catch. She knew I was a meticulous man. She would worry that in my final moments I might try to sign a deathbed will, or that I might try to transfer assets to a charity just to spite her. She couldn't let that happen. She had to be there. She had to be the grieving daughter-in-law at the bedside, ensuring that the old man took his last breath without changing a thing. She needed to oversee the transition of power. I lay in the bed listening to the beep of the monitor. My eyes were closed, but my senses were hyper-alert. Marshall sat in the corner, hidden in the shadows of the adjacent observation room, watching the bank of monitors that fed from the hidden cameras. "She is moving," Marshall's voice came through the tiny earpiece I was wearing. Traffic cams picked up her car. "She is driving fast, Vernon. She is not coming to say goodbye. She is coming to collect." And she wasn't coming alone. Through the hidden microphone in Mr. Bear, which was still transmitting, I heard the chaos in my own home. "Get in the chair," Trey Skylar screamed. "I can't," Trey moaned. "My leg hurts too much today. Please let me stay in bed." "You are coming with me," she yelled. "Your father is dying. We have to go perform. Get in the chair or I will kick your leg again." I heard the struggle. I heard the sound of a heavy body being shoved into the wheelchair. I heard Leo crying in the background. "Mommy, where are we going?" Leo asked. "We are going to say bye-bye to Grandpa," Skylar said. "And then we are going to be very, very rich. Now shut up and get in the car." The cruelty was breathtaking. She was dragging a crippled man and a terrified child to watch a death she was celebrating. She wanted Trey to see me die. She wanted to break his spirit completely. She wanted him to see that his protector was gone, that he was truly alone with her. It took her 40 minutes to cross the city. 40 minutes where I had to lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing, letting the machine do the work. I thought about my life. I thought about the bridges I had built. Bridges are designed to handle stress. They are designed to bend in the wind but not break. Today I was the bridge. I had to hold the weight of this entire family until the trap snapped shut. "They are here," Marshall whispered in my ear. I heard the elevator ding down the hall. I heard the distinct click of Skylar's heels on the linoleum. She walked with purpose. There was no hesitation, no stumble of grief. I heard the squeak of the wheelchair wheels. I relaxed my body completely. I let my jaw slacken. I slowed my breathing to match the ventilator's hiss. The door to my room flew open. Skylar didn't knock. She burst in. She brought a gust of cold air and expensive perfume with her. "Oh, Dad," she cried out. Her voice was loud, theatrical. "Oh my God, Vernon!" She rushed to the bedside. She grabbed my hand. Her skin was cold. She squeezed my hand hard, not for comfort, but to check for a reaction. To check if I was really out of it. I didn't flinch. I let my hand lie limp in hers, heavy and dead. She turned to the empty room. "Where is the doctor?" she demanded. "Why is no one here? My husband needs to see his father." Marshall stepped out from the shadows of the observation room but stayed by the door. He was wearing a white coat, posing as a specialist. "Mr. Hayes is in a deep coma," Marshall said, his voice disguised. "His brain activity is minimal. We are just waiting for nature to take its course." Skylar looked at him. She scanned his face, looking for a lie, but Marshall was a pro. He looked exhausted and defeated. "Is there any chance he wakes up?" she asked. "To sign papers or say goodbye?" "None," Marshall said. "He is gone, madam. The body just hasn't figured it out yet." Skylar let out a breath. It was a sigh of relief so profound it filled the room. She dropped her act instantly. She dropped my hand like it was a piece of trash. "Good," she muttered. She turned to Trey. He was sitting in the wheelchair by the door, looking at me with tears streaming down his face. He looked broken. His face was a map of yellow bruises. His leg was propped up awkwardly. Leo was standing behind the chair, clinging to his father's arm, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Say goodbye to your daddy, Trey." Skylar said, her voice dripping with venom. "Take a good look. This is what happens when you cross me. You end up alone in a cold room." "Skylar, please," Trey sobbed. "He is dying. Show some respect." "Respect?" she laughed. A sharp, cruel sound. Why should I respect him? He tried to cut me out. He tried to investigate me, and look where it got him. She walked around the bed. She ran her finger along the metal railing. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the IV bag. She leaned down close to my ear, closer than she had been in the hospital room with Trey. "Can you hear me, Vernon?" she whispered. "I hope you can. I want you to know that I won. I beat you. You thought you were so smart with your patents and your trusts, but you forgot one thing. You have a heart, and hearts stop." She stood up and looked at Trey. "He didn't sign a will, did he?" she asked sharply. "No," Trey whispered. "Not since Mom died." "Perfect," Skylar said. She reached into her oversized designer bag. She pulled out a document. It wasn't a get-well card. It was an affidavit of asset transfer. "Since he is incapacitated and you are the sole heir," Skylar said, holding the paper in front of Trey, "I need you to sign this. It authorizes me to take immediate control of his accounts to pay for his funeral and outstanding debts." "Debts?" Trey asked. "Dad doesn't have debts." "He does now." Skylar smiled. "My debts. Sign it, Trey. Sign it before he goes cold." "I cannot sign that," Trey said, pushing it away. "Not here, not now." "Sign it," Skylar shrieked. Her patience evaporated. She raised her hand. I lay there listening to the monster reveal herself. Every word was being recorded by the cameras hidden in the smoke detectors. Every threat was being beamed to a cloud server, but it wasn't enough. I needed one more thing. I needed her to touch the kill switch. I needed her to try to kill me. Skylar looked at the machines. She looked at the ventilator pumping air into my lungs. She looked at the document Trey refused to sign. "He is taking too long," she muttered. She looked at Marshall, who had conveniently stepped out of the room to give the family privacy. She thought she was alone. "If he dies right now," Skylar said, talking to herself, but loud enough for the room to hear, "the transfer is automatic. I don't need your signature, Trey. I just need a death certificate." She walked to the wall. She looked at the power cord for the ventilator. "Skylar." "No," Trey screamed. "What are you doing?" "I am helping him let go," she said. Her hand reached for the plug. "I am helping us move on." She wrapped her fingers around the thick black cord. This was it. The overt act. Attempted murder. My heart was pounding real rhythms now, fighting the machine's pacing. Adrenaline flooded my system. "Do it," I thought. "Pull it. Seal your fate." She pulled. The plug popped out of the wall. The ventilator stopped hissing. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. "Oops," she whispered. And that was my cue. I didn't gasp. I didn't choke. I opened my eyes, and I grabbed her wrist with the grip of a man who had spent 40 years bending steel. Lying still is the hardest work a man can do when his blood is boiling. I lay in the center of the palliative care suite, a room designed for dying. The air conditioner hummed a low, constant drone that masked the sound of my own heart beating against my ribs. I was a landscape of wires and tubes. The ventilator tube taped to my mouth tasted of plastic and bitter regret. The makeup artist had done her job well. My skin felt tight under the layer of gray paste she had applied to mimic the pallor of a stroke victim. My eyes were closed, but behind my eyelids my mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. I was the bait in the trap, the honey in the pot. Marshall was watching from the observation room next door. I knew he was there. I could almost feel his anxiety radiating through the wall. We were gambling everything on one assumption, that Skylar Vance was not just greedy but impatient, that she wouldn't be content to wait for nature to take its course. She needed control. She needed to dictate the timeline. I focused on my breathing. In, out, in, out. The machine hissed in perfect synchronization with my chest. I had to surrender to it. If I fought the rhythm, the monitors would spike and she would know. I had to be a corpse before I was dead. The hallway outside was quiet. We had cleared the floor. No witnesses. Just the stage we had set for her. Then I heard it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime down the hall. Click, click, click. The sound of high heels on the hospital linoleum. It was a sharp, aggressive sound. It wasn't the shuffle of a grieving family member coming to say goodbye. It was the march of a general coming to inspect a conquered city. She was coming. I heard the squeak of rubber wheels following her. That would be Trey. My heart clenched. She had brought him to watch. She was dragging my broken son to witness my end. The door to my room swung open. A draft of cold air rushed in carrying the scent of expensive perfume and rain. Mrs. Hayes, the nurse said. She was an actress we had hired, but she played the part perfectly. Her voice was soft, professional. Please keep your voice down. He is in a very fragile state. Skylar didn't whisper. She spoke with a voice that cut through the room like a knife. Leave us, she commanded. But ma'am, I need to monitor his vitals, the nurse protested gently. I said get out, Skylar snapped. I want a moment alone with my father-in-law and my husband. Unless you want me to report you to the administration for denying a family their grief, you will walk out that door right now. I heard the nurse hesitate, then the soft scuff of her shoes as she retreated. The door clicked shut. We were alone. The predator, the prey, and the witness. For a moment there was silence. I could feel Skylar's presence by the bed. I could feel her looking at me. She was assessing the situation. She wasn't looking at a person. She was looking at an obstacle that was finally being removed. Put him over there, she said to Trey. I heard the wheelchair scrape against the floor. Skylar, I don't want to watch this, Trey whispered. His voice was thick with tears. Please let me go outside. You stay right there, Skylar hissed. You need to see this. You need to see what happens to men who think they are smarter than me. Look at him, Trey. Look at the great Vernon Hayes. He looks like a dried-up husk. She walked closer to the bed. I could hear the rustle of her coat as she took it off and threw it onto the chair. She approached my right side. I forced every muscle in my body to go limp. I detached my mind from my limbs. I was a stone. I was a bridge piling. She leaned over me. I could feel her breath on my face. Hey, Vernon, she whispered. Can you hear me in there? I didn't move. I didn't twitch. She let out a short, cruel laugh. I guess not. Marshall said you were vegetable. Looks like he was right for once. Then she touched me. It wasn't a gentle touch. She reached out and grabbed the fleshy part of my upper arm right where the IV line was taped, and she pinched. She dug her nails in, hard. It was a sharp, shocking pain. My body wanted to recoil. My arm wanted to jerk away. It was a primal reflex, but I held it. I focused on the darkness behind my eyelids. I focused on the image of Leo's face. I let the pain wash over me and I remained still. She held the pinch for 5 seconds, twisting the skin, testing me. She let go. He is out, she said to Trey. He didn't even flinch. He is meat, Trey. Just meat. She turned her attention to the bedside table. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open, plastic cups rattling, papers shuffling. Where are they? She muttered. What are you looking for? Skylar, Trey asked, his voice trembling. The keys, you idiot, she snapped. The keys to the safe in his basement. I know he keeps a backup set on him. He never trusts banks completely. She began to pat down the clothes that were folded on the chair. My flannel shirt, my jeans. She rifled through the pockets. Keys, 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 where are the keys? She came back to the bed. She started patting down the hospital gown I was wearing. Her hands were invasive rough. She checked the pocket of the gown. Nothing. Damn it, she cursed. She stood there, breathing heavily. I could feel her frustration radiating off her like heat. She was so close to the finish line, but she didn't have the keys to the kingdom yet. She looked at the monitors. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm was slow, thready. He is taking too long, she said. Skylar. He is dying, Trey said. Just let him go in peace. I don't have time for peace, she shouted. I have a transfer to authorize, and the bank closes in 2 hours. If he dies tomorrow, the paperwork gets complicated. I need him dead today. I need the death certificate dated today so I can access the emergency funds before the weekend. She paced the room. Click, click, click. Then she stopped. She was standing at the foot of the bed. She was looking at the machine, the ventilator, the bellows moving up and down, pumping life into my lungs. You know, Trey, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying conversational tone. The doctor said there is no brain activity. He is just a shell. Keeping him on this machine is actually cruel. It is prolonging the inevitable. Skylar. No. Trey gasped. I could hear him trying to move, trying to wheel the chair forward, but he was weak and she had engaged the brakes. Don't touch that. I am doing him a favor, she said, walking slowly toward the wall outlet. I am doing us a favor. She reached the head of the bed. She stood directly over me. I could feel her shadow falling across my face, blocking out the harsh hospital light. You know, Vernon, she whispered, leaning down so close her lips brushed my ear. I always hated the way you looked at me, like you saw right through me. Well, look at you now. You can't see anything? She reached out. I heard her hand brush against the plastic tubing of the oxygen line. You should have just signed the check, Vernon, she murmured. You could have lived a few more years in a nice nursing home, but you had to be stubborn. You had to protect the legacy. Her hand moved from the tube to the thick black power cord plugged into the wall. Sleep tight, old man, she said. Your money is going to buy me a very beautiful life. And don't worry about Leo. I will send him to a boarding school, far away. So I never have to look at his eyes again. That was it. The mention of Leo, the boarding school, the final threat. She gripped the plug. I didn't wait for her to pull it. I didn't wait for the machine to silence. The intent was clear. The act was in motion. She had crossed the line from thief to murderer in the span of a heartbeat. My eyes snapped open. I didn't open them slowly. I opened them wide, staring directly into her face, which was inches from mine. For a fraction of a second, she didn't react. Her brain couldn't process what it was seeing. The corpse had opened its eyes. The meat had become a man. Then her eyes went wide. The pupils dilated in sheer primal terror. Her mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. I moved. My hand, the hand she had pinched, the hand she thought was dead, shot up with the speed of a striking cobra. I grabbed her wrist, the wrist holding the plug. My grip was iron. It was the grip of a man who had built skyscrapers. It was the grip of a father protecting his blood. Skylar gasped, the sound strangling in her throat. I squeezed. I felt the delicate bones of her wrist grind together under my fingers. Hello, Skylar, I said. My voice wasn't weak. It wasn't the voice of a dying man. It was deep, resonant, and cold as the grave she tried to put me in. You seem surprised. She tried to pull away. She tried to claw at my face with her free hand, but I held her fast. I slowly sat up, the wires and tubes trailing from me like the tentacles of a vengeful sea creature. I ripped the tape off my mouth with my other hand. You, she stammered. Her face was white, a mask of absolute horror. You are dead. I looked her dead in the eye. Not yet, I said. And neither are you. But your life as a free woman ended the moment you touched that plug. I twisted her arm, forcing her down to her knees beside the bed. She cried out in pain. Trey was staring at us from the corner, his mouth hanging open. He had stopped crying. He was watching his father rise from the dead and take down the monster. It is over, Skylar, I roared, and then the door burst open. The silence in the room was shattered by the sound of a gasp. It was a wet, choking sound, like someone surfacing from deep water only to find no air. Skylar Vance looked down at her wrist. Her eyes were wide circles of white surrounded by smeared mascara. She looked at my hand, the hand of the man she thought was a vegetable, the hand of the man she was murdering. My fingers were wrapped around her bones so tightly that her skin was turning white under the pressure. She tried to pull back. She yanked her arm with all her strength, a frantic jerking motion of pure animal panic. But I didn't budge. I was an anchor. I was the foundation of a skyscraper. I held her there, frozen in the act of her crime. Hello, Skylar, I said. My voice was rough from the dry air of the ventilator, but it was strong. It filled the room. It bounced off the sterile walls and hit her like a physical blow. You seem surprised. She opened her mouth. Her jaw worked up and down, but no words came out. She looked at the plug in her other hand. She looked at me. She looked at the monitors, which were still beeping a slow, steady rhythm. because Marshall had overridden the alarms. She finally squeaked. Finally, you are awake. I sat up. I didn't struggle. I didn't groan. I rose from the pillows with a fluid, deliberate motion, the wires and tubes trailing from my chest like the broken chains of a prisoner who has just snapped his shackles. I ripped the tape from my face. I pulled the ventilator tube from my mouth and threw it on the floor. I looked her dead in the eye. I let her see the fire that had been burning inside me for weeks. I let her see the judgment. I was never asleep, Skylar, I said. My voice dropped an octave, deadly and cold. And you were never in charge. I twisted her wrist. She cried out, dropping the power cord. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "Let go of me!" she shrieked. Her voice was climbing into hysteria. "You are hurting me. Trey, help me. He is hurting me." She looked toward the wheelchair, expecting her victim to save her, expecting the broken man she had tortured to come to her defense one last time. But Trey didn't move. He sat in his wheelchair, his hands gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. He was staring at the scene in front of him. He was staring at the woman who had just tried to kill his father. The fog of pain and manipulation was lifting. He was seeing her clearly for the first time in 3 years. "Help you," Trey whispered. His voice was trembling. "You just tried to unplug him, Skylar. I watched you. I was checking the connection," she lied immediately, her brain scrambling to find a narrative. It looked loose. I was trying to fix it. "He is crazy, Trey. He grabbed me." I laughed. It was a harsh bark of a laugh. "You were checking the connection," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" I pulled her closer until her face was inches from mine. I could smell the fear on her. It smelled like sweat and expensive powder. "You were buying your freedom, Skylar. You were cashing out. But there is one thing you forgot about economics." I tightened my grip one last time, feeling the tendons in her wrist shift. "Freedom is expensive, Skylar, and you cannot afford it." I shoved her away. I didn't just let go, I pushed her. She stumbled backward, her high heels slipping on the polished floor. She fell hard, landing on her hip. She scrambled backward, scuttling like a crab toward the door. "I am leaving," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "You are all insane. I am calling the police." "You don't have to," I said, standing up from the bed. I pointed to the far wall of the room, a large flat-screen television that had been black until now suddenly flickered to life. "Look," I commanded. Skylar froze. She looked at the screen. The image was grainy but clear. It was black and white night vision. It was the interior of my house. The timestamp was from last night. Skylar's voice filled the hospital room, amplified by the speakers. I pushed him. I looked him right in the eye and I shoved him. And I watched him tumble all the way down. And you know what I felt when his neck snapped? I felt rich. Skylar stared at the screen. Her mouth fell open. She watched herself strike Trey. She heard the wet slap of her hand against his face. She heard herself threatening to kill him. "No," she whispered. "That is not real. That is AI. You faked that." Then the image on the screen changed. It switched to a live feed. A feed from the ceiling of this very room. It showed Skylar standing over my bed. It showed her hand reaching for the plug. It showed the pure malice on her face. And then the door to the observation room opened. It didn't open quickly. It opened slowly, ominously. Marshall walked out. He wasn't wearing the doctor's coat anymore. He was wearing his suit. He held a file in his hand. And behind him was a man in a uniform, a man with a badge that caught the light. The chief of police. And 2 officers. Skylar Vance Marshall said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Or should I say Sarah Jenkins. Skylar spun around. She looked at the police. She looked at the door. She looked for an exit. But there was no exit. The chief of police stepped forward. He was a big man, a friend I had known for 20 years. He looked at Skylar with pure disgust. "Ms. Jenkins, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Vernon Hayes, the abuse of a vulnerable adult fraud, and based on this new confession, the murder of Arthur Penhaligon in Texas." No, Skylar screamed. It was a feral sound. A sound of a wild animal caught in a steel trap. "You can't do this. I am the conservator. I have rights. That recording is illegal. You can't use that." Marshall smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Actually, we can," Marshall said calmly. "You see, Skylar, when you entered this facility, you signed a waiver at the front desk, the one you didn't read because you were in such a hurry to kill Vernon. It clearly states that for the safety of patients, all rooms are monitored by audio and video recording. You consented to be recorded, Skylar. You signed your own confession. Skylar looked at her hands. She looked at the officers who were advancing on her. The facade cracked, the porcelain doll shattered, the sophisticated wife vanished, and the street hustler came out. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, backing into the corner. "Get away from me, you pigs!" She pointed a shaking finger at Trey. "Tell them, Trey. Tell them I love you. Tell them I take care of you. Don't let them take me. Who will manage your money? Who will tell you what to wear? You are nothing without me." Trey slowly turned his wheelchair to face her. He looked at the woman he had married. He looked at the woman who had isolated him, beaten him, and tried to kill his father. He wiped the tears from his face. He sat up straighter. "You are right, Skylar." Trey said, his voice gaining strength. "I was nothing with you. I was a ghost." He looked at me. He looked at the man standing tall by the bed. "But my father is here now," Trey said. "And I am done being your victim." He looked back at her with eyes that were cold and hard. "You aren't my wife," Trey said. "You are the devil. And I hope you rot." "You ungrateful cripple," Skylar spat. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly hatred. "I should have finished you off when I had the chance. I should have thrown Leo down those stairs too." The room went deadly silent. She had said it. In front of the police. In front of witnesses. She had threatened the child. The chief of police nodded to his officers. "Take her." The officers moved in. They didn't be gentle. They grabbed her arms and slammed her against the wall. Skylar fought. She kicked. She bit. She screamed profanities that would make a sailor blush. "Get your hands off me, I am rich," she screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut. "I have millions. I will sue you all. I will burn this hospital down." They dragged her out. She was kicking her heels, leaving black scuff marks on the floor. Her screaming echoed down the hallway, a long, fading wail of a banshee being dragged back to hell. I watched her go. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happiness. I felt a heavy, profound relief. The weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. The room was quiet again. The ventilator was silent on the floor. The TV screen went black. I looked down at myself. I was wearing a hospital gown. I was covered in gray makeup. I had wires glued to my chest. I felt ridiculous. And I felt powerful. I reached up and ripped the electrodes off my chest one by one. Zip, zip, zip. I grabbed a towel from the bedside table and wiped the gray paste from my face. I scrubbed hard until my skin tingled until the color returned. I walked to the closet and pulled out my clothes. My flannel shirt, my work boots, my vest. I dressed slowly. Every button I fastened felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I put on my watch. I put on my glasses. I turned to Marshall. He nodded. "Good work," Vernon Marshall said. "The Texas Rangers are already on the line. They are reopening the Arthur case. She is never getting out." I nodded. "Thank you, Marshall." Then I turned to Trey. He was still sitting in his wheelchair, looking at his hands. He looked small. He looked ashamed. I walked over to him. My boots clicked on the floor. Heavy. Solid. I knelt down. My bad knee popped, but I didn't care. I knelt so I was eye level with my son. "Trey," I said softly. He couldn't look at me. "Dad, I am so sorry. I was so weak." I let her. I put my hand on his shoulder. It was a heavy hand. A warm hand. "Look at me, son." Trey raised his head. His eyes were swimming with tears. "You weren't weak," I said firmly. "You were surviving. You stayed alive for Leo. That is not weakness. That is what a father does." "But I hit you," Trey whispered. I smiled. It was a small, tired smile. "You hit like a girl," I joked. Trey let out a wet laugh. A sob broke through his chest. He leaned forward and buried his face in my shoulder. He cried. He cried for the pain. He cried for the betrayal. He cried for the years he had lost. I held him. I held my grown son the way I had held him when he was a boy and had scraped his knee. I rocked him. "It is over," I whispered into his ear. "The monster is gone. We are safe now." I looked up at the ceiling. I took a deep breath of the cool air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. "Come on," I said, standing up and wiping my eyes. "Let's go get Leo. I think Mr. Bear has done enough work for one day." I grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. I pushed my son out of the room, out of the fake deathbed, and into the corridor. We walked past the nurse's station where Betty was waiting. She was smiling, crying, and clapping her hands silently. I winked at her. We walked out of the hospital doors. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long golden rays across the wet pavement. I took a deep breath. I was 68 years old. I was tired. I was bruised. But as I loaded my son into the car, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just a retired engineer anymore. I was the foundation. And the foundation was holding strong. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, but when you feed them a confession recorded in high definition, they grind with terrifying speed. The trial of Sarah Jenkins, also known as Skylar Vance, did not last long. There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, but the image of her face when the verdict was read is burned into my memory forever. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for mercy. She stared at the jury with the cold, dead eyes of a shark that realizes it has finally been beached. The jury found her guilty on all counts: attempted murder, elderly abuse, fraud. And thanks to the cooperation of the Texas Rangers, they added a charge of first-degree murder for the death of her first husband, Arthur. The judge was a woman who had no patience for predators. She looked Skylar in the eye and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no early release. There would be no more scams. Skylar Vance was erased from society just as she had tried to erase my son. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned to look at us one last time. She didn't look at me. She looked at Trey. She sneered. She wanted to leave him with one last scar, one last moment of fear. But Trey didn't flinch. He sat beside me, his hand resting on my arm, and he looked through her as if she were made of glass. She was already a ghost to him. The legal battle was over, but the healing had just begun. Physical wounds heal in a predictable timeline. Bones knit together in 6 weeks. Bruises fade in 10 days. But the mind is a more complex machine. Trey had spent 3 years living in a psychological prison. He had been brainwashed to believe he was incompetent, unlovable, and weak. He had been gaslit until he couldn't trust his own memories. We started therapy immediately, not just for him, but for all of us. I sat in waiting rooms reading old magazines while my son spent hours talking to a trauma specialist, unpicking the knots Skylar had tied in his psyche. There were bad days. Days when he would wake up screaming from a nightmare, convinced she was standing over his bed with a needle. Days when he would apologize profusely for spilling a glass of water, terrified of a punishment that was never coming. I learned patience in those months. I learned that I couldn't fix him with a wrench or a blueprint. I had to fix him with presence. I had to be the steady, constant force in his life that never wavered. I cooked him dinner. I drove him to his physical therapy appointments. I never asked him to talk about it, but I was always there when he was ready. 6 months passed. The seasons changed. The winter that had brought the storm faded into a green, hopeful spring. One evening I was sitting on the back porch of the house, this house that I had built with my own hands from the foundation up. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the lawn. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and jasmine. I was drinking iced tea, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. The screen door creaked open. Trey walked out. He wasn't using the wheelchair anymore. He wasn't even using a cane. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the fracture, but he stood tall. He looked like himself again. The hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness that was slowly turning into wisdom. He sat down in the rocking chair next to me. The wood groaned under his weight. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic. It was a comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between two men who know they don't need words to understand each other. Dad, Trey said softly. I looked at him. He was staring out at the yard, at the big oak tree where he used to have a tire swing. I am sorry, he said. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand to stop me. No, let me say it. I am sorry I didn't believe you. I am sorry I let her push you out. I am sorry I was so weak that I let a monster into our home and almost let her destroy us. I look back at who I was and I don't recognize him. I feel ashamed, Dad. A man is supposed to protect his family, and I let my family be the target. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed the deed under duress. I took a sip of my tea. I set the glass down on the railing. I turned my chair to face him. Trey, look at me. He lifted his head. His eyes were wet. You are not weak, I said. My voice was low and firm, the voice of a father. You were targeted. Predators don't hunt the weak son. They hunt the kind. They hunt the generous. She went after you because you have a good heart, and she used that goodness against you. I leaned forward. And you survived. You took the beatings. You took the poison. You took the psychological torture. And you are still here. You are sitting on this porch. You are raising your son. That is not weakness, Trey. That is survival. And survival is the ugly part of strength that nobody talks about. Trey let out a long, shaky breath. A tear slipped down his cheek. You saved me, Dad, he whispered. We saved each other, I corrected him. I might have kicked down the door, but you had to walk through it. I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder. I felt the muscle there solid and real. You are alive, son. That is all that matters. The money, the house, the reputation, none of that means a thing if you aren't breathing. We can rebuild everything else, but I couldn't rebuild you. Trey covered my hand with his. He squeezed it. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we just sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, letting the darkness settle around us, not as a threat, but as a blanket of peace. The ghosts were gone. The house was clean. The next morning broke bright and clear. I woke up early the way I always do. I made coffee and went out to the workshop in the garage. But I wasn't fixing a car. I was working on a future. The sound of small feet running on concrete made me turn around. Grandpa, look. Leo came sprinting into the garage holding a toy airplane. He was 6 now. He had grown 2 inches in the last half year. The fear that had haunted his eyes, the flinching whenever an adult raised a hand, was fading. He was laughing again. He was loud. He was a child. Hey there, little man, I said, putting down my pencil. Is that a new jet? Yes, Leo said, breathless. It goes super fast. Can we build a runway for it? I laughed. I picked him up and sat him on the workbench. He looked at the large sheet of paper spread out before me. It was a blueprint, but not for a bridge or a factory. What is this? Leo asked, tracing the white lines with his small finger. This, I said, wrapping my arm around him, is the new plan. It was a design for a treehouse. But not just any treehouse. It was a Vernon Hayes design. It had a retractable ladder, a lookout tower, and a secret communication system connected to the main house. We are going to build this together, I told him. You, me, and your daddy. It is going to be the strongest treehouse in the state. Leo's eyes went wide. Can I use the hammer? I smiled. I looked at his small brown hands so full of potential. I looked at his face, which held the legacy of my father and his father before him. We come from a line of builders, a line of men who work with their hands, who endure, who create shelter for those they love. Skylar had tried to break that line. She had tried to sever the root. But she failed. Yes, I said. You can use the hammer. I will teach you. I will teach you how to build things that last. And I will teach you how to tell the difference between solid ground and quicksand. Trey walked into the garage holding a mug of coffee. He leaned against the doorframe, watching us. He smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. I looked at my family. We were scarred. We were bruised. We were a little less innocent than we used to be. But we were standing. We were together. I am Vernon Hayes. I am a black man in America. I am a father. I am a grandfather. I have spent my life building structures that can withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. But the strongest thing I ever built wasn't made of steel or concrete. It was this circle of protection around my blood. I hugged Leo tight, smelling the soap and sunshine in his hair. We are going to be okay, I whispered. The screen fades to black. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that evil may have its hour, but truth has its eternity. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to fight for your family. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone take your keys to the kingdom. This journey taught me that the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake silence for weakness. Skylar thought that because I was old and quiet, I was defenseless. She was wrong. True strength is not about how loud you scream. It is about how hard you fight when the people you love are in danger. Being a father does not stop when your children are grown. It just changes. Sometimes love means building a treehouse, but But sometimes love means tearing down a monster to protect the foundation. We survived because we refused to stay broken, and we remembered that the truth is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. If you believe that family is worth fighting for, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to be the rock for someone you love during a storm? I read every single story. Until next time, stay strong and watch over your own.